Dust choked the air as Margaret Caldwell's wagon wheels sank deeper into the merciless sand. The storm had come without warning, stranding her miles from the nearest settlement. Her supplies dwindled with each passing hour, and the howling wind seemed to whisper death's approach. When consciousness began to fade, a silhouette emerged from the swirling tempest, tall, powerful, moving with the certainty of one born to this harsh land. The Apache chief's son, following his eagle's guidance, lifted her from certain death and carried her toward the hidden mesa village no white eyes had ever seen. There, among the sacred circle of the lightning people, Margaret would find more than shelter. She would discover ancient wisdom that would change her forever, but could she truly cross the divide between their worlds? Would the knowledge of the thunder songs heal or destroy what grew between them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. His arms were strong, secure against the storm's fury. Margaret drifted between consciousness and darkness as the tall Apache carried her through the churning wall of sand. Each time her eyes fluttered open, she caught glimpses of determination etched across his weathered face. Not once did his stride falter. "Stay," he commanded in halting English, when she stirred against his chest. "Storm not done." The broken wagon wheel lay half-buried behind them now, the last remnant of the life Margaret had known. 3 months ago, she had stood beside a fresh grave in Missouri, watching as the earth swallowed her husband of 12 years. The fever had taken Henry quickly, leaving her with nothing but deeds to land in Arizona territory and a promise they had made together. "We'll start again," he had told her in those final lucid moments. "You go on without me if need be." She had sold everything except what would fit in the wagon. The settlements had grown scarce these last 50 miles, and the warnings more frequent. "Apache country," the station master had cautioned. "No place for a woman alone." Yet Margaret had pressed on. 32 years old, and unwilling to return to her sister's pitying gaze back east. The Apache shifted her weight, his breath measured despite their pace. Around his neck hung a single eagle feather on a leather cord. It fluttered against her. Cheek surprisingly soft. "Medicine," he said, noticing her gaze. "Protection." He slipped the talisman over his head and placed it around her neck. The gesture startled her more than the howling wind. "Nakohe," he said, touching his chest. "Margaret," she replied, her voice barely audible against the storm. A smile flickered across his face. "Margaret," he repeated, the syllables reshaped by his tongue. The sky darkened further as dust blotted out the afternoon sun. Without warning, Nakohe ducked into a narrow crevice in the sandstone wall that Margaret hadn't even noticed. The passage twisted sharply, then opened to a sheltered hollow where the air grew suddenly, mercifully clear. "Rest," he said, setting her down carefully on a smooth stone ledge. Margaret's limbs trembled with exhaustion. "My wagon, my things—" "Gone," Nakohe stated simply. "Dust takes." The finality in his voice struck her like a physical blow. Everything she owned, everything she had salvaged from her former life, buried beneath the relentless sand. Nakohe reached for a small pouch at his waist and offered her dried meat. "Eat. Strength." The jerky was unfamiliar, gamier than beef, but not unpleasant. As Margaret chewed, memories of Henry's plans unfurled in her mind. They were to build a trading post, become part of the new frontier. Now she sat in a cave with a man from the very tribe settlers feared most. "Why help me?" she finally asked. Nakohe tilted his head, considering. "Eagle showed path. Lightning people do not ignore signs." "Lightning people?" "My tribe," he explained, gesturing upward as if pointing through the stone to the sky beyond. "We read thunder songs. We know storm magic." His English, while limited, carried the cadence of someone who had spent time among white settlers. Margaret wondered where he had learned it. "Missionaries," he said, as if reading her thoughts. 3 summers. I learned words. They learned nothing. A wry smile accompanied this assessment, revealing a glimpse of humor Margaret hadn't expected. The storm's roar diminished gradually. Nakohe rose and moved to the passage entrance, studying the fading light. Soon we go, village not far. Village? Alarm surged through Margaret. No, I need to reach Tucson. Nakohe shook his head. Too far. Storm comes again tomorrow. Village safe. Fear and pragmatism warred within her. The odds of surviving alone, without supplies or transportation, were negligible. Yet entering an Apache village voluntarily seemed equally dangerous. Your people won't welcome me, she said. Father is chief, Nakohe replied simply. You live because Eagle showed me. You stay until next moon. It wasn't a request. Margaret touched the eagle feather around her neck, suddenly understanding its significance. This man had claimed responsibility for her by sharing his medicine. Nakohe watched her fingers trace the feather. You understand? Good. When they continued their journey, the storm had subsided enough to reveal the landscape's stark beauty. Massive buttes rose like sentinels against the amber sky. Nakohe moved with the confidence of someone following a trail visible only to him. They climbed steadily upward along a narrow path that clung to the canyon wall. Margaret's fear of heights nearly overwhelmed her as they navigated a ledge barely wide enough for Nakohe's feet. He held her securely. But the drop below seemed endless. Close eyes, he suggested. Trust hands, not eyes. She did as he advised, burying her face against his shoulder. His heartbeat remained steady, his breathing unchanged, despite carrying her weight for hours. Look now, he said eventually. Margaret opened her eyes to a view that stole what little breath she had left. They had reached a high mesa, its surface carved with dwellings that blended seamlessly with the natural rock. Smoke rose from circular openings, and terraced gardens cascaded down protected slopes. Tsodzil, Nakohe said, home of lightning people. Margaret's vision began to darken at the edges. The combination of exhaustion, dehydration, and the overwhelming strangeness of her circumstances finally took its toll. As consciousness slipped away, she heard Nakohe call out in his native tongue, voices answering with surprise and concern. The last thing she felt was being passed into different arms, the eagle feather still secure around her neck. A talisman. Between worlds, fever dreams plagued Margaret's sleep, dust storms chasing her across endless canyons, Henry's voice calling from beneath the sand, and always the sensation of falling. When consciousness finally returned, she found herself lying on a bed of soft hides in a circular dwelling. Light filtered through a smoke hole above, illuminating walls of polished clay and woven hangings. An elderly woman sat nearby, grinding, herbs in a clay bowl. Her silver-streaked hair hung in 2 long braids, and her weathered face bore the marks of a life lived beneath harsh suns. She looked up, dark eyes sharp with intelligence. You wake. Good, she said in surprisingly clear English. Drink. She offered a cup containing a bitter liquid that Margaret reluctantly swallowed. I am Istu, the woman continued, returning to her grinding. Medicine woman, you very sick from storm. 3 days sleeping. 3 days? Margaret struggled to sit upright, her head spinning with the effort. Istu nodded. Nakohe bring you half dead. Dust in lungs, now better. Memory flooded back, the broken wagon, the rescue, the eagle feather that no longer hung around her neck. Where is he? Nakohe? With council. Elders not happy. White woman in village. Never before. Istu's tone conveyed the gravity of the situation. Chief Kitchi listens to son, but others fear. As if summoned by her words, the dwelling's entrance flap moved aside. Nakohe ducked inside, followed by a taller, older man whose bearing immediately marked him as someone of importance. The eagle feather talisman hung once again around Nakohe's neck. Father, Nakohe said to the older man, gesturing toward Margaret. She wakes. Chief Kitchi studied Margaret with unreadable eyes. Unlike his son, he wore no trace of settler influence. His clothing, his bearing, everything about him was purely Apache. "My son says Eagle showed your path," he said in halting English. "Eagle medicine strong, but white people bring soldiers, sickness, death to Apache." Margaret struggled to find appropriate words. "I'm grateful for your son's help. I don't wish harm to your people." The chief's expression remained impassive. "Words easy. Truth in time." He turned to leave, then paused. "Tonight, rain ceremony. You watch, then we decide." After he departed, Nakohe approached her bedside. "Many think I should have left you. Say white woman brings bad medicine." "Perhaps they're right," Margaret replied softly. "My presence endangers you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I follow Eagle's path. Not always easy path, but true path." Margaret's gaze drifted to the clay bowl beside her bed. "Istu said I've been here 3 days. You've been caring for me all this time?" "Istu knows medicine better than any. This," he pointed to the bowl, "saves you. Herbs that grow where lightning strikes ground. Very powerful." As dusk fell, drums began to pulse from the center of the village. Nakohe helped Margaret to her feet, steadying her as her legs trembled with weakness. "You watch from here," he said, leading her to the dwellings. "Entrance, stay with Istu." The village's central plaza had been transformed. Fires burned in a precise pattern, and dancers moved between them, wearing elaborate masks adorned with zigzag patterns. The elders, including Chief Kitchi, sat in a semicircle, their faces solemn. "In the firelight, thunder beings," Istu explained, noticing Margaret's fascination. "They speak through lightning. We listen." Nakohe had joined the dancers, his movements fluid and precise. Unlike the others, his face remained uncovered, his expression one of complete focus. As the drums intensified, the dancers began to chant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Suddenly, though the sky remained clear, a rumble of thunder rolled across the mesa. The villagers responded with cries of affirmation. Margaret felt goosebumps rise along her arms. "They call thunder," she whispered. Istu nodded. "Lightning people know old ways. White people forget." As the ceremony reached its climax, Nakohe turned toward where Margaret stood watching. Their eyes met across the plaza, and in that moment she felt something shift within her, a recognition that the world was far wider, far stranger, and far more wondrous than she had ever imagined. Morning light painted the Pueblo walls with amber hues as Margaret ventured outside for the first time. Her legs were still unsteady, but determination drove her forward. The village was already bustling with activity, women grinding corn on stone metats, men crafting weapons and tools, children running errands between dwellings. A young woman approached, carrying a folded bundle. She resembled Nakohe around the eyes, though her features were softer. "I am Ayana," she said carefully in English. "Nakohe's sister. This for you." She held out the bundle, a dress of soft buckskin, beautifully adorned with intricate beadwork. Margaret touched the garment with reverence. "It's beautiful, but I couldn't—" "Your clothes," Ayana gestured to Margaret's tattered dress. "Not good for here. Too heavy. Too hot." Her tone brooked no argument. With Ayana's help, Margaret changed behind a woven screen. The Apache dress felt strange against her skin, lighter than anything she'd worn before, yet surprisingly sturdy. "You look like lightning." "People now," Ayana said with cautious approval. "Come, I show village." As they walked, Ayana pointed out features of the Mesa community, teaching Margaret words in the Apache language. "Wiki up," she named the dome-shaped dwellings. "Say," for the stones arranged in complex patterns. "Ku," for the sacred fire that burned perpetually in the village center. Margaret struggled with the unfamiliar sounds, but Ayana proved a patient teacher. They passed a group of men constructing what appeared to be an irrigation system, channeling precious water from a hidden spring. Our people have lived here for many generations, Ayana explained, her English improving as she relaxed. The mesa protects us. Water comes from deep earth. We grow 3 harvests each year. Margaret's surprise must have shown on her face, for Ayana smiled knowingly. White people think Apache only hunt, fight. We are more. They continued to a terrace carved into the mesa's side, where carefully tended gardens flourished in the harsh environment. Women worked among plants Margaret had never seen, harvesting leaves and roots. Medicine plants, Ayana explained. Some grow only here, some grow only where lightning touches earth. Margaret recalled Istu's healing bowl. The herbs that saved. Me, Ayana nodded. Lightning plants very powerful, only medicine people touch. Their tour ended at a structure larger than the others, where Nakohi waited with Chief Kitchi and several elders. Margaret felt suddenly self-conscious in her Apache dress, aware of the elders' scrutinizing gazes. "You walk," Nakohi observed, approval warming his voice. "Good." Chief Kitchi gestured to a place in their circle. "Sit. Eat with us." The meal consisted of flatbread, roasted meat, and a stew rich with unfamiliar flavors. Margaret ate cautiously at first, then with appreciation as her palate adjusted to the new tastes. "Nakohi says you travel alone," one elder said in broken English. "No husband?" "My husband died," Margaret answered simply. "I was traveling to land we purchased together." "Purchase land?" another elder scoffed. "How buy what great spirit makes?" Before Margaret could respond, Nakohe intervened. "Different ways, father. Her people see land differently." "And where did you learn our language?" "Nakohe," Margaret asked, curious about his unusual position between worlds. A shadow crossed his face. "When young, taken to mission school. 3 years there before escaping, learned English, reading, numbers." His tone grew bitter. "They tried to make me forget Apache ways. Failed." Chief Kitchi placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Nakohe uses white man's knowledge to protect our people, knows their ways, but keeps heart of lightning people." As the meal concluded, Nakohe walked Margaret back toward Istu's dwelling, where she had been given a small adjoining room. "Tomorrow," he said, "if strength returns, I show you Eagle's place. Begin real learning." "Learning what?" Margaret asked. Nakohe looked skyward, where clouds were beginning to gather. "Learning to hear what thunder says." He touched the eagle feather at his throat. "Learning why you were brought to lightning people." Margaret glanced down at her Apache dress, running her fingers over the intricate beadwork. In just days, her world had shifted completely. The woman who had set out for Tucson seemed increasingly distant, like a character from a half-remembered story. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, their underbellies tinged with an ominous green. The village hummed with purposeful activity. As the lightning people prepared for the coming storm, Margaret watched from the doorway of Istu's dwelling as children secured loose items and women covered drying racks of food. "Big medicine coming," Istu said, joining her. In the old woman's hands was a smooth, dark stone, about the size of a hen's egg. Thunderstone, very old, very powerful. Margaret studied the unusual object. "What does it do?" "It speaks when thunder near. Listen." Istu placed the stone against Margaret's palm. At first, Margaret felt nothing but cool, polished rock. Then, as a distant rumble crossed the sky, the stone seemed to vibrate subtly against her skin. The sensation traveled up her arm like a whisper. "I feel it," she gasped. Istu nodded approvingly. "Stone knows lightning before sky shows. Old ones. The stone is Thunder's egg, fallen from sky long ago." Nakohi appeared, dressed differently than Margaret had seen him before. His chest was bare, except for painted symbols in red and yellow ochre, and eagle feathers adorned his hair. "Time for Thunder Song," he told Margaret. "You come. Watch from sacred circle." The village gathered in concentric rings around a central fire pit. Unlike the rain ceremony Margaret had observed before, this gathering had a more solemn air. Chief Kitchi and the elders took positions at cardinal points around the circle. Istu guided Margaret to sit beside her, close enough to observe, but separate from the ritual participants. "Why do they call you Lightning Runner?" Margaret whispered to Nakohe as he prepared to join the inner circle. A rare smile crossed his face. "When boy, lightning struck tree beside me, did not hide, did not run away, walked toward bright light. Old ones say lightning chose me." The ceremony began with a low, rhythmic chanting. The thunderstone in Istu's hands began to vibrate more noticeably as the storm approached. 4 warriors entered the circle carrying long poles topped with peculiar metal points. "Lightning catchers," Istu explained, "draw power from sky to earth." The chanting intensified as the first lightning flashed across the darkening sky. Margaret counted instinctively, 1, 2, 3, before thunder rolled across the mesa. With each lightning strike, the poles were raised higher. With each thunderclap, the chanters altered their song. "They speak with storm," Istu said. "Ask thunder." Beings for wisdom, for protection. Rain began to fall, fat drops sizzling as they hit the hot stone. No one moved from the circle. The thunderstone in Istu's hands now hummed constantly, and Margaret felt a strange resonance within her own chest, as if something long dormant were awakening. At the height of the storm, Nakohe stepped forward. Raising his arms toward the turbulent sky, lightning flashed directly overhead, illuminating the entire mesa in stark white light. In that frozen moment, Margaret saw not people, but the land itself, ancient, enduring, alive with power. The thunder that followed seemed to speak directly to her, not in words, but in feelings, impressions that bypassed her mind and resonated with her spirit. She gasped, gripping Istu's arm. "You hear," the old woman said. "It wasn't a question. Thunder speaks to you." When the ceremony concluded, the storm moved eastward, leaving behind clean air and glistening rocks. The villagers dispersed quietly, each returning to their disrupted tasks. Nakohe approached Margaret, his expression questioning. "I heard it," she said before he could ask. "Not with my ears, but inside." He nodded solemnly. "First step on long path. Tonight you dream thunder dreams. Tomorrow we begin real teaching." That night, as Istu had predicted, Margaret's sleep was filled with vivid dreams. She soared above canyons on eagle's wings, rode the wind alongside storm clouds, and heard voices speaking in the language of rainfall. When she woke just before dawn, the thunderstone lay beside her bed, placed there by unseen hands during the night. She touched it gently. Even without the storm, she could feel a faint vibration within, like a heartbeat, slow and steady, connecting her to something vast and ancient. Dawn found Margaret huddled in the corner of her small room, scratching careful notes into a leather-bound journal she had managed to keep hidden in the folds of her original dress. It was the only possession besides her wedding ring that had survived the journey to the mesa. The pages, once meant for recording business transactions, now filled with observations about Apache medicine, thunder ceremonies, and the meanings of different lightning patterns. A shadow fell across the doorway. Margaret hastily tucked the journal beneath her sleeping mat. "What you hide?" Ayana asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Margaret hesitated. Trust came slowly here, each small piece earned through actions, not words. "A book," she admitted finally, "for writing memories, knowledge." Ayana's expression darkened. "You write lightning people secrets, for white soldiers?" "No," Margaret protested, "for myself, to remember what I learn." Before Ayana could respond, shouting erupted outside. Both women hurried to the dwelling's entrance. A crowd had gathered. Near the central fire, voices raised in argument. At the center stood Nakohe, facing a tall, muscular warrior whose stance radiated hostility. "Tokala," Ayana whispered. "He thinks Nakohe brings danger by keeping you here." They moved closer, enough to hear the heated exchange, which Ayana translated in hushed tones. "She writes our secrets in white man's marks," Tokala accused. "She will bring soldiers to our hidden place." Nakohi stood firm. The woman follows Eagle's path. She is under my protection. Your protection endangers us all, Takala countered, gesturing angrily toward Margaret as she approached. White woman has no place among lightning people. Others murmured agreement. Margaret felt the weight of suspicious glares. Understood. Suddenly how precarious her position remained. Then a woman's cry cut through the tension. A small child, no more than 3 years old, had collapsed near one of the cooking fires. His mother cradled him, wailing in distress as his small body convulsed with spasms. Without thinking, Margaret pushed through the crowd. "Let me see him," she urged, kneeling beside the frantic mother. The child's skin burned with fever, his breathing labored. Margaret recognized the symptoms immediately. Her youngest brother had suffered similar fits during childhood fevers. "Cool water," she instructed, "and cloths, quickly." To her surprise, Istu appeared with the requested items, nodding approval. "Help if you can." Margaret soaked the cloths and placed them on the child's forehead, under his arms, behind his neck. "We need to lower his body heat," she explained to the watching crowd. "The fits come from the fever cooking his brain." She worked steadily, replacing the cloths as they warmed, speaking soothingly to the frightened mother. Gradually, the child's convulsions subsided. His breathing eased. "He needs willow bark tea," Margaret said, looking to Istu. "For the fever." The old medicine woman nodded. "We call it Azi. Same medicine." Together they prepared the remedy, blending Margaret's knowledge with Istu's traditional preparations. By sunset, the child slept peacefully in his mother's arms, the dangerous fever broken. Chief Kitchi approached as Margaret washed her hands in a clay basin. "You know healing ways," he observed. "My mother was skilled with herbs," Margaret explained. "She taught me before she died." The chief studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps Eagle's wisdom greater than Tokala thinks." Later, as stars appeared above the mesa, Nakohi found Margaret sitting alone, her journal open in her lap. "You write again," he noted, but without accusation. "Knowledge should be preserved," she said, closing the book carefully. "Your people's wisdom about thunder medicines combined with what I know, together they saved that child today." Nakohi nodded slowly. "Two paths can meet, become stronger path." He touched the journal lightly. "But some knowledge sacred, not for writing." Then, "Teach me to remember those parts in the Apache way," Margaret replied. "I want to learn, Nakohe, not to take from your people, but to understand." "Tomorrow," he promised, his hand lingering near hers, "we begin with Eagle's teaching." As he walked away, Margaret reopened her journal. Beneath her earlier notes about thunder medicines, she carefully sketched the symbol she had seen painted on Nakohe's chest during the ceremony. A zigzag line connecting sky to earth, the path of lightning itself. They departed before dawn, climbing a narrow trail that wound higher than the mesa village. Margaret followed Nakohi's sure-footed steps, her borrowed moccasins silent against the stone. 2 weeks among the lightning people had strengthened her body and sharpened her senses. She moved differently now, more aware of the earth beneath. Her feet, the whispers of wind, the subtle changes in light. "How much farther?" she asked, using the Apache words Ayana had taught her. Nakohe glanced back, approval flickering in his eyes at her use of his language. "When sun touches red cliff," he replied in English, pointing to a distant formation. "Eagle waits there." As they climbed, he taught her to read the landscape, which plants indicated hidden water, how to recognize game trails, what different bird calls signified. Margaret absorbed it all, comparing his knowledge with what she had learned from books, and her father's woodland teachings back east. "These marks," Nakohe said, indicating subtle scratches on a boulder, "tell other Apache this path safe." Old messages. They paused at a high overlook. Far below, the canyon lands stretched to the horizon, painted in bands of ochre, crimson and gold by the rising sun. Margaret caught her breath at the beauty. Look there, Nakohe directed, pointing to a distant dust cloud. Wagons, white settlers. Margaret shaded her eyes. How far? 2 days' ride, moving toward Tucson. His expression remained neutral, but she sensed his concern. More come each moon. They continued upward until reaching a narrow ledge beneath an overhanging cliff. Nakohe removed a small bone whistle from his pouch and blew a series of notes that echoed across the canyon. The sound hung in the air, hauntingly beautiful. Eagle call, he explained. Used by my grandfather, his father before, carries far. In canyon winds. They waited in silence. Margaret was about to speak when a shadow passed overhead. A massive golden eagle circled once, twice, then landed on a nearby outcropping. Its fierce eyes regarded them with uncanny intelligence. Tuditli, Nakohe said reverently, my guide since youth. The eagle mantled its wings briefly, then settled, watching them. Nakohe removed a small offering of meat from his pouch. Placing it on the rock between them, the bird did not approach. He tests you, Nakohe told Margaret. You offer. With trembling fingers, Margaret took the morsel and placed it closer to the eagle. The great bird studied her for a long moment, then hopped forward to claim the offering. As it ate, Nakohe nodded with satisfaction. Eagle accepts you. Good sign. While the eagle preened, Nakohe taught Margaret to use the stars for navigation, tracing patterns in the morning sky that would be clearer at night. North Star never moves, he explained, always shows true path, like your eagle showed you. My path? Margaret asked. Nakohe's gaze held hers. Eagle sees what is hidden, what must be found. The intensity in his eyes made Margaret's heart quicken. For weeks, she had sensed something growing between them, something neither acknowledged directly. What did the eagle show you about me? She asked softly. Instead of answering, Nakohe reached slowly toward her face, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. Eagle shows path, he said finally. Not always reason. Reason comes later. The eagle screeched suddenly, wings spreading wide. Both turned to watch as it launched into the air, circling higher until becoming a mere speck against the vast blue sky. As they began their descent, Nakohe taught Margaret the eagle bone whistle calls, placing the ancient instrument in her hands. Different songs for different messages, he explained. This for danger, this for greeting, this for calling help across great distance. Margaret practiced until she could produce clear notes that carried across the canyon. The skill filled her with unexpected pride. Near the village, they paused at a high vantage point. Nakohe pointed to thin lines of smoke rising from hidden locations throughout the surrounding landscape. Apache signals, he explained, talking across mountains, warning of strangers, sharing news. Margaret realized suddenly how vast the Apache network was. Not just one village, but many, all connected through ancient communication systems no settler would recognize or understand. Your people see everything that moves through this land, she said with dawning comprehension. Nakohe nodded, his expression grave. We watch, we wait, we survive. Not this one, Istu corrected, gently moving Margaret's hand from a flowering plant. Similar but not lightning-kissed, look for blue marks on stem. Margaret examined the neighboring plant more carefully, noting the faint azure striations running along its woody base. This one? The old medicine woman nodded approvingly. Good. Eyes now, learning to see. They knelt at the edge of a precarious canyon ledge, gathering herbs for the coming winter months. 2 other women worked nearby, occasionally glancing at Margaret with lingering suspicion, but no longer with open hostility. A month among the lightning people had changed her in ways both visible and invisible. How can you tell where lightning has touched the earth? Margaret asked, placing the carefully harvested plant in her gathering basket. Istu pointed to the scorched rock face behind them. Lightning leaves marks, sometimes seen, sometimes felt. She pressed a weathered hand against the stone. Earth remembers lightning's path. Special plants grow only there. From her medicine pouch, Istu produced a small copper mortar and pestle, their surfaces worn smooth from generations of use. Old metal, she explained, from before Apache, before Spanish, holds lightning medicine better than stone. She demonstrated how to crush the leaves, releasing a sharp, clean scent, unlike anything in Margaret's previous experience. Lightning cleanses, Istu continued, purifies. These plants carry that power. Their harvest complete, they followed. A narrow trail along the canyon rim, Margaret moved with newfound confidence, her balance sure even on treacherous sections. Below, the canyon floor lay hundreds of feet down, but she no longer felt the paralyzing fear that had gripped her during her first journey with Nakohe. As they rounded a bend, Istu stopped abruptly, holding up her hand in warning. She pointed silently to fresh tracks crossing their path, moccasin prints, but with a distinctive pattern different from the Lightning People's footwear. Navajo, Istu whispered. Not enemy, not friend. We go different way. They backtracked to a fork in the trail, taking a steeper, more difficult route. Margaret followed without question, understanding now that survival depended on reading such subtle signs. Upon returning to the village, they found an atmosphere of tension. A child lay ill in the central healing lodge, surrounded by concerned family members. The boy's skin had an alarming yellowish tint, his breathing labored. Liver sickness, Istu murmured. Very bad. She motioned for Margaret to join her inside the lodge. The boy's mother looked up with desperate hope as they entered. Chief Kichi and Nakohe stood nearby, their expressions grave. We bring lightning. Medicine, Istu announced, setting down her basket. With practiced movements, she began sorting through their gathered herbs, selecting specific combinations. To Margaret's surprise, she handed her the copper mortar and pestle. You prepare, Istu instructed. Your hands now know the way. Conscious of the watching eyes, Margaret began grinding the herbs as Istu had taught her. Her fingers moved with unexpected certainty, as if guided by some deeper knowledge. The pungent aroma filled the small space. Nakohe knelt beside her. You have healer's touch, he observed quietly. I'm following Istu's teaching, Margaret replied, focused on her task. Not just that, he countered. You listen with spirit, not just ears. When the medicine was prepared, Istu directed Margaret to apply the poultice to the child's abdomen while she began the healing chant. The boy's mother watched with anxious eyes as Margaret's pale hands worked alongside Istu's dark ones, settler and Apache medicines, combining in a single purpose. As the ceremony progressed, Margaret found herself joining the chant, the Apache words flowing from her lips with surprising ease. A curious warmth spread through her hands as she worked, a sensation both foreign and familiar. Hours later, the boy's fever broke. His breathing eased, and the yellow tinge began to fade from his skin. The family's gratitude needed no translation. Outside the lodge, Nakohe waited. You did well, he said. The people see now what Eagle saw. What do you mean? One who walks between worlds, he answered, bringing new medicine to old ways. His hand briefly touched hers, making both stronger. In the fading light, Margaret realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer merely a visitor being tolerated. She had become something else, not fully Apache, but no longer simply the lost white woman from the dust storm. They knife whirled end over end, striking the center of the target with a solid thunk. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the watching warriors. Tokala retrieved his weapon with a fluid grace that spoke of years of practice, his eyes never leaving Nakohe as he did so. Your turn, Lightning Runner, he said, the challenge evident in his tone. Margaret watched from the edge of the gathering, where she stood with Ayana. 2 months in the village had taught her to read the currents of Apache politics. Tokala, a respected warrior from a prominent family, had been expected to marry Ayana before Margaret's arrival disrupted the village's equilibrium. He has wanted my brother's place since childhood, Ayana whispered. Now he wants more than ever to prove Nakohe wrong. About me? Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer. Ayana nodded. About bringing outsider to sacred knowledge, about changing old ways. Nakohe stepped forward, accepting Tokala's knife with formal courtesy. He tested its weight, then turned to face the target. His throw was different, less showy but equally precise. The knife embedded itself beside Tokala's, a finger's width closer to the center. Your blade flies true, Nakohe acknowledged. As always. Tokala's jaw tightened. Blade is only one test of warrior, he replied. My father asks why. Chief's son spends more time teaching white woman than protecting our hunting grounds from settlers. A tense silence fell over the gathering. Nakohe's expression remained calm, but Margaret saw the subtle shift in his stance, like a cougar preparing to leap. I follow Eagle's path, Nakohe replied evenly. As my father taught, as his father taught before. And where does Eagle's path lead? Tokala challenged. To bringing strangers to sacred places? To sharing lightning people medicine with outsiders? He gestured toward Margaret. She learns our ways, but keeps white woman's heart. When soldiers come, where will her loyalty stand? Before Nakohe could respond, Chief Kichi emerged from his lodge. The gathered warriors parted respectfully as he approached. My son follows his vision, the chief said. As do you, Tokala. Different paths, both honorable. He turned to address the assembled men. While you test knives, scouts bring news. Soldiers build new fort 2 days' ride south. More settlers follow. Navajo move closer to our hunting grounds. Pushed by white expansion. The chief's words scattered the brewing confrontation like wind through dry leaves. Warrior concerns immediately shifted to practical matters of defense and territory. Later, as Margaret helped Istu sort medicines, Nakohe found her. His expression was troubled in a way she hadn't seen before. Tokala is not wrong in everything, he admitted, sitting beside her. Dangers grow around us. My people face difficult times. Margaret set down the herbs she was bundling. Because of people like me. Not you, he corrected. But yes, your people. They see land as thing to own, not living spirit to respect. A heavy silence fell between them. Finally, Margaret spoke the question that had haunted her for weeks. Why did you really save me, Nakohe? The Eagle's path explanation satisfies others, but I know there's more. He studied her face for a long moment. I saw you fighting storm, not giving up. Spirit strong, like Apache spirit. His voice softened. And I saw something else. Bridge between worlds. Old prophecy speaks of such. Margaret's heart quickened. What prophecy? Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the village entrance. A scout raced in, dust covering his sweat-streaked face. He spoke rapidly to Chief Kichi in Apache, too fast for Margaret to follow. What is it? She asked Nakohe, who had risen to his feet, suddenly alert. Soldiers, he replied grimly, not just passing through, looking for something. Their eyes met in sudden understanding. Or someone, Margaret whispered. Tokala approached, his earlier antagonism submerged beneath urgent purpose. He carried an intricately carved knife, different from his throwing weapon, a blade made for serious combat. Now we see where white woman's loyalties lie, he said, looking directly at Margaret. Soldiers search for missing settler woman. They show your image to tribes they meet. He turned to Nakohe. Council gathers. Your father calls for you. As they departed, Tokala cast one final look at Margaret. Not hostile now, but weighing, calculating. She recognized it as the look of a warrior assessing a potential threat. That night, for the first time since her arrival, no one came to bring Margaret to the evening meal. 3 days passed with Margaret confined to Istu's dwelling, a subtle but unmistakable prisoner. Food appeared at regular intervals, but few words accompanied it. Even Ayana's visits grew brief and guarded. Only Istu remained unchanged, continuing Margaret's lessons in herb lore as if nothing had happened. Council still talks, the old woman explained when Margaret pressed for information. Some fear, some trust. Lightning season comes. Important time. Decisions wait until after sacred dance. On the fourth morning, Nakohe finally appeared. His face revealed little, but Margaret had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself. "You come with me," he said simply. Outside, the village hummed with preparations for the lightning dance ceremony. Elaborately painted masks hung drying in the sun, their zigzag patterns representing lightning's path. Women ground colored minerals for body paint while men practiced rhythm patterns on hollowed logs. "The council?" Margaret asked as they walked. "Divided," Nakohe replied. "Takala says return you to soldiers, save village. Others say no, soldiers would follow, find hidden mesa. And you? What do you say?" He stopped, turning to face her. "I say prophecy more important than fear." He led her to his father's lodge, where Chief Kitchi waited with Istu and 3 elder men Margaret recognized from council gatherings. On a woven mat between them lay a ceremonial mask, unlike the others she had seen in the village. Crafted from wood and copper, with intricate lightning patterns inlaid in shell and stone. "Sit," Chief Kitchi instructed. When she had settled across from him, he spoke with deliberate care. Many generations ago, lightning people made prophecy. One would come from outside, not Apache born, but Apache spirit. One who walks between worlds like lightning walks between sky and earth. Istu continued the explanation. This one would learn thunder songs, speak with lightning voice, would come when great danger threatens lightning people. "You think I'm this person from your prophecy?" Margaret asked, skepticism evident in her voice. "Not think." "No," Istu replied firmly. "Thunderstone speaks when you touch. Eagle accepts your offering. Storm brings you when needed most." Chief Kitchi gestured to the mask. "Tonight, lightning dance. You watch from sacred circle. No outsider ever permitted this, but you not outsider now, you lightning woman." The implications overwhelmed her. Margaret looked to Nakohe, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Do you believe this?" she asked quietly. His dark eyes met hers. "I believe Eagle showed me your path for reason. I believe you hear thunder songs few can hear." Later, as dusk approached, Ayana helped Margaret prepare for the ceremony, applying special clay to her face and arms in patterns that matched those worn by the Lightning People women. The familiar dress she had worn for weeks was replaced by a ceremonial garment adorned with lightning symbols. "Many still fear," Ayana warned as she worked. "Takala has strong voice, speaks to those who resist change." "And you?" Margaret asked. "Do you believe I'm this prophesied person?" Ayana's hands paused. "I believe my brother has never been wrong when following Eagle's path." As darkness fell, the village gathered in concentric circles around the central fire. Margaret was positioned in the inner ring with the elders and medicine people, a placement that drew surprised murmurs and sharp glances. The ceremony began with low, rhythmic drumming. Dancers wearing animal masks entered first, followed by those representing natural forces, wind, rain, thunder. Last came the lightning dancers, their bodies painted with glowing minerals that caught the firelight. The masked figures moved with hypnotic precision, their formations creating patterns that seemed to Margaret both chaotic and perfectly ordered, like lightning itself. The drums accelerated, the chanting intensified, and the dancers' movements became faster, more urgent. Margaret felt something shift within her, a resonance, as if the Thunderstone's vibrations had taken residence in her chest. The masks before her blurred, and suddenly she was seeing beyond them, into a vision of crossing paths, colliding worlds. When the dance reached its climax, storm clouds gathered overhead despite the season. The first lightning flashed across the sky, perfectly synchronized with the dancers' movements. Thunder rolled across the mesa as if in answer to their calls. Later, as the village slept and the clouds drifted eastward, Nakohe found Margaret standing alone at the mesa's edge, still wearing her ceremonial dress. "You saw," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she admitted. "I saw what's coming." He moved beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. And, worlds colliding, blood, change. She turned to face him, but also hope, if paths cross rather than clash. Lightning flickered in the distant sky, illuminating his face for one breathtaking moment. Margaret reached out, her fingers tracing, the lightning symbol painted on his chest. He caught her hand, held it against his heart. "Lightning woman," he whispered, then lowered his mouth to hers. From the shadows, Tokala watched, his hand tightening around his knife. Dawn broke with urgent footsteps and hushed voices. Margaret woke to find Ayana already gone from their shared dwelling, the morning unusually quiet despite the early commotion. She dressed quickly and stepped outside. The village center buzzed with controlled activity. Warriors gathered around Chief Kitchi while women quietly prepared travel packs. Children were ushered into the innermost dwellings, away from the perimeter. Nakohe spotted Margaret and beckoned her to join the council. Surprised faces greeted her approach, but no one objected. The atmosphere had shifted overnight. Fear, temporarily overriding suspicion. "Scout returns," Nakohe explained tersely. "Many soldiers in canyon, not just passing through." A dust-covered warrior sat drinking water, a brass spyglass, clearly of military origin, lying beside him on the ground. He spoke rapidly in Apache, pausing occasionally as Chief Kitchi asked questions. He found this watching soldier camp, Nakohe translated, indicating the spyglass. 20, maybe 30 blue coats, wagons with supplies for long search. Margaret studied the military instrument. "May I?" The scout handed it to her reluctantly. She examined the markings on its side, recognizing the manufacturer. "This is standard army issue. If they're setting up a forward camp rather than just passing through, they're planning systematic search patterns." "What does this mean?" Chief Kitchi asked directly. "It means they're not leaving until they find what they're looking for." Margaret answered honestly. An elder spoke up. "We should move to winter grounds early, leave no trace." "Winter grounds closer to Navajo territory," another countered. "Already troubled there." "They seek the woman," Tokala said, entering the circle. "Give her to them." "End danger." Margaret felt the weight of every gaze. "If they're looking for me specifically, they must believe I'm alive. Someone must have seen Nakohe carrying me during the storm, or found wagon tracks leading nowhere," Nakohe suggested. Chief Kitchi studied Margaret thoughtfully. "You know soldier ways, how they think, how they search." "Yes," she acknowledged. "My father and brother both served. I grew up on military posts." A ripple of reaction passed through the gathering. This was new information, potentially damaging, yet potentially valuable. "Then you help us understand their plan," the chief decided. "Not as prisoner, not as sacrifice. As lightning woman." Tokala's jaw tightened, but he remained silent as Margaret was brought to a clear patch of ground. Using a stick, she drew a rough map of the surrounding territories based on what she'd learned from Nakohe's teachings and her own observations. "Military search patterns are systematic," she explained, marking the likely camp location. "They'll send scouts in widening circles, focusing on water sources first. They know no one survives in this country without water." She indicated the natural barriers, canyons, ridges, mesa formations. "They'll be watching for smoke, unusual movement, anything that doesn't fit natural patterns." "Our hidden paths?" an elder asked. "Safe if you're careful," Margaret replied. "Soldiers aren't trackers by nature, but they often hire local guides." "Navajo," someone muttered darkly. Margaret continued her analysis, drawing potential search routes and suggesting countermeasures. As she worked, she became acutely aware of the irony, using knowledge from her own people to help the Apache evade them. When she finished, Chief Kitchi nodded with grave approval. "Good medicine. Sees with both eyes, Apache and white. Tokala stepped forward. Words are wind. How do we know her heart is true? Her people search for her. Her people threaten us. Test her loyalty, someone suggested. Yes, Tokala agreed. Send her with Nakohe to watch soldier camp. If she signals them, we know. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Chief Kitchi considered the proposal, then looked to his son. What says Lightning Runner? Nakohe met Margaret's eyes. I trust Lightning Woman's heart, but others must see truth with own eyes. I'll go, Margaret said firmly. I'll prove where I stand. Then it is decided, Chief Kitchi declared. Nakohe and Lightning Woman will scout soldier movements, bring true knowledge of their purpose. As the council dispersed to prepare for all contingencies, Nakohe drew Margaret aside. Dangerous path, he warned quietly, for both of us. I know, she replied, but it's the only way to prove my loyalty lies with the Lightning people now. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. When did your heart change? Margaret thought of her lost wagon, her abandoned plans, the life she had expected to build. Then she thought of thunder songs, healing ceremonies, and the profound connection she had found on this mesa. Perhaps it didn't change, she whispered. Perhaps it finally found its true home. They departed at false dawn, when shadows still clung to the canyon walls and the air held night's coolness. Margaret's face and hands had been darkened with walnut stain, her hair plaited in Apache style. She wore Ayana's clothes, moved with the posture Istu had taught her, and kept her eyes lowered as befitted a young Apache woman. Remember, Nakohe cautioned as they descended the hidden trail. No English if others near, no looking directly at white men. Margaret nodded, her heart pounding with the risk they were taking. If the soldiers identified her, Nakohe would be captured or killed. If they succeeded, she would be cementing her betrayal of her own people. Neither prospect brought comfort. They traveled swiftly along routes no settler would recognize. Dry. Stream beds, narrow game trails, passages between towering rock formations. Nakohe moved like water flowing downhill, and Margaret followed, her body having learned more than her mind fully recognized. Near midday, he drew her into a sheltered crevice and knelt in the sand. With quick, precise movements, he sketched a map, then erased it immediately after showing her. Soldier camp here, he explained, indicating a canyon junction. We approach from high rocks. See, but not be seen. By afternoon, they had positioned themselves on a ledge overlooking the military encampment. The brass spyglass proved invaluable as they observed the systematic activity below. 24 soldiers, several civilian scouts, wagons of supplies. This was no casual patrol, but a dedicated search operation. More prepared than expected, Nakohe murmured. Not just looking for lost woman. Margaret studied the camp layout, recognizing the military precision. That's Captain Ellsworth, she whispered, identifying the officer giving orders. He was stationed at Fort Breckenridge when I passed through. He's known for his efficient Indian campaigns. A map table had been set up outside the commander's tent. Officers gathered around it, pointing to various locations. Margaret desperately wished she could see what they were marking. We need to get closer, she said. Nakohe shook his head. Too dangerous. There's another way. Margaret pointed to a small group of traders approaching the camp. I know that man, Joseph Keene. He sold supplies to the wagon train I traveled with. Understanding dawned in Nakohe's eyes. You speak to him while I watch? Yes. He won't recognize me like this, but I can get close enough to overhear what they're planning. Nakohe considered the risk, then nodded slowly. I watch from here. If danger, I signal with Eagle Call. They separated near the canyon floor. Margaret's heart hammered as she approached the traders' wagons, keeping her head down and her movements measured. She carried a small basket of herbs as her pretext, looking like an Apache woman hoping to trade medicine plants. She positioned herself within earshot of Keene's conversation with the lieutenant. Their voices carried clearly in the dry air. Not Just the missing woman anymore, Keane was saying. Survey team found promising samples up in these canyons. The colonel's convinced there's a major silver deposit. So we're not just running a rescue mission, the lieutenant replied. Rescue, hell, Keane scoffed. That woman's coyote food by now. This is about securing the territory before word gets out. These hills could be worth millions. The lieutenant lowered his voice. What about the Apache problem? That's why you boys are here, isn't it? Find their hiding places now, while we have an excuse to be searching every canyon. Margaret nearly dropped her basket. This was far worse than a search for a missing settler woman. They were mapping the entire territory, including the sacred areas of the lightning people. A soldier approached, eyeing her suspiciously. What's your business here, squaw? Margaret kept her eyes down, offering herbs with a gesture of trade. The soldier lost interest and moved on, but she knew her time was limited. As she retreated, Joseph Keane looked directly at her. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Something familiar in her bearing, perhaps, despite the disguise. Margaret turned away quickly, moving toward the canyon path where Nakohe waited. They retreated in tense silence until safely beyond the soldier's perimeter. Only then did Margaret relate what she had overheard. Silver, Nakohe repeated, his expression grim. White man's hunger for shining rocks never ends. It's worse than we thought, Margaret said. They're using my disappearance as an excuse to map your territories. Once they find the silver deposits, they will bring more soldiers, more settlers. Nakohe's jaw tightened. Drive lightning people from sacred lands, as they have done to tribes before us. As they prepared to continue their journey back to the mesa, a bird call echoed across the canyon. Not Nakohe's eagle signal, but different, warning. Tokala, Nakohe whispered, suddenly alert. He follows us. Margaret's blood ran cold. Why would he? To test you, or to prove you false. Nakohe checked his weapons. We take different path now, more difficult, but safer. But as they turned to depart, a shower of loose stones betrayed movement on the ridge above. The arrow struck a hand's breadth from Margaret's foot, quivering in the sandstone. Nakohe pushed her behind him, drawing his knife in one fluid motion. Show yourself, Tokala, he called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. The warrior emerged from behind a boulder, bow still in hand. Another arrow nocked, but not drawn. Two companions flanked him, their expressions hard as the surrounding stone. I see clearly now, Tokala announced, approaching with deliberate steps. Lightning Runner's white woman speaks with soldiers, and suddenly they know to look for silver. In our sacred lands, you twist truth, Nakohe countered. We watched her, she betrayed nothing. I saw her speak with white trader, Tokala insisted. Saw him recognize her. Margaret stepped forward despite Nakohe's protective stance. I overheard their plans. They seek silver deposits. My disappearance is merely their excuse to search these canyons. Tokala's laugh was sharp as shattered flint. Convenient story, yet soldiers move closer to our hidden trails each day. Because you lead them there, Nakohe said suddenly, his eyes narrowing. Your tracks cross too many open spaces. Easy for soldier scouts to follow. One of Tokala's companions shifted uncomfortably. Nakohe pressed his advantage, moving closer to examine marks on the canyon floor. These are not Apache boot prints returning to the village, he observed, kneeling. These lead elsewhere. Tokala's face hardened. We hunt, we scout, we protect lightning people while you play with your white woman. No, Nakohe countered, rising with something in his hand. You meet with others. He held up a broken arrow, not of Apache design, its fletchings distinctively patterned with red and black bands. Navajo make, Nakohe said, his voice dangerous now. Their scouts work for soldiers sometimes. What agreement have you made, Tokala? The atmosphere shifted instantly. Tokala's companions looked between the broken arrow and their leader. Uncertainty, replacing conviction in their stance. Speak truth now, Nakohe demanded. Truth, Tokala spat. Truth is our ways die while we hide. Chief's son brings white woman to sacred ceremonies, calls her lightning woman because of some old prophecy. Meanwhile, more whites come every moon, soon nowhere left for Apache. So you would lead soldiers to us? Trade our safety for what? Nakohe's voice was lethal in its quietness. For survival, Tokala shouted. Navajo make peace with whites, get reservation land, protection. We can do same if we offer something valuable. Silver, Margaret whispered, understanding dawning. You would trade your sacred land for reservation scraps. Better than graves, Tokala replied bitterly. I would save our people. By betraying them, Nakohe countered. Thunder rumbled unexpectedly, though the sky remained largely clear. Margaret felt the familiar vibration in her chest that preceded major storms. She had learned to recognize the feeling during her time with the lightning people. Storm comes, she said quietly, touching Nakohe's arm. Big one. Soon, he glanced. At her, then at the distant horizon where only the faintest clouds were visible. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized her certainty. We return to village now, Nakohe declared. All of us. Chief Kitchi will judge this matter. Tokala's bow came up. I think not. Better you both disappear. I tell village soldiers found you. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Margaret's mind raced, cataloguing options, escape routes, weapons. Then she felt it again, stronger this time, the vibration that preceded lightning. Your arrow will not fly straight in storm winds, she said to Tokala, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence Istu used for prophecies. Thunder beings come. They have shown me your heart's darkness. As if summoned by her words, a violent gust swept through the canyon, swirling dust into miniature cyclones. The sky darkened with unnatural speed. Lightning woman calls the storm. One of Tokala's companions murmured fearfully. Tokala hesitated, his certainty visibly faltering as the wind intensified. Margaret stepped forward, no longer seeking Nakohe's protection. I choose lightning people over my own, she declared. What do you choose, Tokala? Your people's destruction for false promises. Soldiers lie. Silver makes them lie more. The first. Heavy raindrops struck like small stones. Nakohe seized the moment, moving with lightning quickness to disarm Tokala. The warrior's companions backed away, unwilling to fight against what appeared to be the storm's judgment. We return now, Nakohe commanded. Storm provides cover from soldier eyes. As they made their ascent toward the hidden mesa trails, the heavens opened fully. Tokala walked ahead, disarmed but dangerous, while his companions followed in subdued silence. Margaret and Nakohe brought up the rear, the driving rain washing the last traces of walnut stain from her skin. You knew storm was coming, Nakohe said quietly. Thunder spoke to you. Yes, Margaret replied simply. It grows stronger each time. His hand found hers briefly in the downpour. Lightning woman indeed. The storm transformed the canyonlands into a realm of chaos and power. Flash floods scoured the lower passages, obliterating tracks and forcing the soldiers to abandon their systematic search patterns. Lightning speared the sky continuously, turning night to stuttering day as the lightning people gathered in their most sacred circle. Tokala knelt before Chief Kitchi, his face impassive despite his disgrace. The broken Navajo arrow lay before him, damning evidence of his attempted betrayal. You sought alliance with those who would reveal our hiding places, the chief said, his voice heavy with judgment. You would trade sacred land for reservation chains. I sought survival, Tokala responded. The white tide rises. We cannot stop it. So you would drown willingly? Nakohe challenged from his father's side. Kneel before those who break every promise? Thunder punctuated his words, so close it seemed to emanate from within the ceremonial lodge itself. Chief Kitchi raised his hand for silence as Istu entered, leading Margaret. She had been prepared according to ancient ritual, her body painted, with lightning symbols, her hair woven with copper strands that caught the ceremonial firelight. The thunderstone hung from a leather cord around her neck, humming audibly in the storm's proximity. "Lightning woman comes when worlds collide," Istu announced to the gathered tribe. "Storm reveals true path forward." Margaret felt oddly calm, despite the ceremony's gravity and Tokala's burning gaze. The past hours had brought clarity about the soldiers' intentions, about Tokala's desperate gambit, and about her own transformed identity. She was no longer Margaret Caldwell, widow, seeking a new beginning in Tucson. She had become something neither fully Apache nor fully white, but a bridge between colliding worlds. Chief Kitchi directed her to the center of the circle, where a copper rod had been driven into the earth. Similar rods formed a perimeter around the entire village. Lightning rods, she realized, designed to protect the dwellings by channeling strikes to specific points. "Lightning beings speak clearest in storm voice," Istu instructed. "Place hands on copper. Listen with spirit, not ears." Margaret knelt beside the rod as the ceremony began. Warriors chanted the thunder song she had learned, their voices rising and falling with the storm's rhythm. Rain pounded the lodge roof, while wind howled through specially designed openings, creating an otherworldly harmony. The thunderstone against her chest vibrated with increasing intensity as she placed her palms against the cool copper. The metal grew warmer beneath her touch, though whether from her body heat or some other energy, she couldn't tell. The chanting peaked as lightning and thunder crashed simultaneously overhead. Margaret felt every muscle in her body tense as energy surged through the copper rod. Not pain exactly, but a sensation of being filled beyond capacity, of boundaries dissolving. Her vision tunneled, then expanded exponentially. She saw the canyon lands from above, soldiers huddling in makeshift shelters, Navajo scouts retreating from the flooded lowlands, and the hidden mesa of the lightning people glowing with an inner light visible only to her transformed sight. Then, wider still, wagon trains stretching across the continent, settlements spreading like ripples in a pond, and the ancient peoples retreating before them. Not just Apache, but dozens of tribes, each with their own medicine, their own connection to the land. At the center of this sweeping vision stood a bridge, not physical, but a connection between worlds. On one side, the technology and restless expansion of white civilization. On the other, the profound earth wisdom of indigenous knowledge. And spanning the gap between them stood figures like herself, not fully belonging to either world, but able to translate between them. When awareness returned, Margaret found herself lying on the ceremonial furs, the gathered tribe watching in hushed reverence. The storm had passed, though distant thunder still rumbled beyond the mesa. "She returns," Istu announced, "marked by lightning." Margaret raised a trembling hand to her shoulder, feeling raised skin in a pattern she somehow knew without seeing, the branching path of lightning itself, etched permanently into her flesh. "What did you see?" Chief Kitchi asked. "A choice," Margaret answered, her voice strangely resonant. "Not between worlds, but a joining of them. Not surrender, but selective adaptation." She looked directly at Tokala. "The white tide cannot be stopped, but it can be channeled, like lightning itself." Nakohe helped her to her feet, his touch lingering. "You have Apache name now," he told her. "Tsebigai, White Lightning." That night, as the tribe prepared for whatever would come, Nakohe found Margaret at the mesa's edge, watching distant campfires of the soldiers below. "I cannot go back," she said softly, "even if I wanted to." "Would you?" he asked, the question that had hung between them for months. Margaret touched the lightning mark on her shoulder, still sensitive but no longer painful. "My path is here now." She turned to face him fully. "With the lightning people. With you." Nakohe's hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "Then we face what comes together as lightning runner and white lightning. Two worlds joining," she whispered as his lips met hers. Margaret approached the military camp alone, a white flag of truce fashioned from a bleached deerskin raised above her head. She wore her original dress, salvaged and mended by Ayana's skilled hands. Though the thunderstone remained hidden beneath its collar, the morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon as soldiers spotted her, rifles rising in alarm before the captain barked orders to hold fire. "I am Margaret Caldwell," she called out clearly, "the woman you've been searching for." Commotion erupted through the camp. Captain Ellsworth himself came forward, disbelief etched across his weathered face. "Mrs. Caldwell, good God, woman, we thought you dead months ago." "As you can see, Captain, I'm very much alive," she replied, lowering the flag as she reached the camp perimeter. The next hours passed in a blur of questions, exclamations, and barely concealed suspicion. She was given food, coffee, and a place by the fire while explaining her carefully constructed story, how she had become lost in the dust storm, found shelter in a cave, and survived on her own knowledge of desert plants until coming across the military expedition. "Remarkable," Ellsworth commented, studying her with narrowed eyes. "Most people wouldn't last a week out there, let alone months." "My father taught me well," Margaret replied simply. "He always said knowledge weighs nothing to carry." "And you saw no Indians? No sign of Apache?" a lieutenant pressed. "None that troubled me," she answered truthfully, if incompletely. The trader, Joseph Keene, watched from across the fire, his expression calculating. "Funny thing," he said eventually. "Could have sworn I saw an Apache woman at camp yesterday who reminded me of someone. Walked like a white woman, she did." Margaret met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps she'd had similar contact with settlers. We all learn from those we encounter, Mr. Keene." Before he could respond, Captain Ellsworth changed the subject. "We'll escort you to Tucson when we've completed our survey. Your property deeds should still be valid, though I expect your wagon and goods are long gone." "Your survey," Margaret repeated carefully. "I understood this expedition was mounted to search for me." "Initially, yes," Ellsworth admitted, "but the territory requires proper mapping, strategic purposes." "Strategic mineral purposes, you mean?" Margaret suggested, watching his reaction. The captain's eyes hardened slightly. "You seem remarkably well-informed for someone who's been lost in the wilderness." "I observe. I listen." She leaned forward. "Captain, I've come with a purpose beyond my own rescue. I believe I can help prevent unnecessary bloodshed." "Bloodshed?" he repeated, glancing at his officers. "The Apache know why you're really here," she said quietly. "They know about the silver deposits." A charged silence fell over the gathering. Ellsworth signaled his subordinates away before responding. "If you've had contact with hostiles, Mrs. Caldwell, you'd best disclose it now." "They're not hostile unless threatened," she countered. "They've lived in these canyons for generations. The silver you seek lies beneath their sacred sites. The government will determine proper compensation, like it has for other tribes," Margaret interrupted. "Broken treaties, forced relocations, starvation on reservations." The captain's expression closed. "You sound remarkably sympathetic to savages who would have taken your scalp on sight." "Perhaps I've learned that savage is a word used by those who don't understand different ways of living," she replied evenly. "The Apache have medicines, knowledge, and technologies perfectly adapted to this harsh land. They don't want war. Then what do they want? What are you proposing?" Ellsworth asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming suspicion. Margaret outlined the compromise Nakohe and Chief Kitchi had developed: designated mining areas away from sacred sites, guaranteed water rights, and recognition of certain territories as Apache land in perpetuity. In exchange, she concluded, they would allow safe passage through specific routes and cease all raids on settlements that respect these boundaries. "You speak as their representative," Ellsworth observed, "not as a rescued settler woman." Margaret touched the hidden thunderstone. "I speak as someone who has seen both worlds and understands what's at stake." "Pretty words," interjected Colonel A. Hargrove, emerging from his tent. "But the Apache understand only force. We've dealt with their kind before." Margaret recognized the name. a notorious Indian fighter whose campaigns were marked by particular brutality. "The Apache have watched your every movement since you entered the canyon lands," she said, meeting his cold gaze. "They could have attacked a dozen times. They chose peace instead, or they recognize superior firepower," Hargrove countered. "No, Mrs. Caldwell, while we appreciate your unusual perspective, this territory will be secured properly. The mines will be established wherever the silver lies richest." "Even if it means massacre?" she asked quietly. "Even if it means progress," he corrected with a thin smile. As the discussion deteriorated, Margaret felt the thunderstone warm against her skin. A distant rumble crossed the cloudless sky, not weather, but a signal. Nakohe was nearby, watching, waiting for her signal. She stood abruptly. "I need air. This has been overwhelming." Allowed to walk near the perimeter under guard, Margaret positioned herself where the canyon wall would carry sound to the hidden observers above. She hummed softly, the pattern of the thunder song that meant danger, betrayal, prepare for conflict. The stone vibrated in response, message received. Dawn painted the canyon walls crimson as the military column advanced. 30 soldiers, 6 civilian surveyors, and 3 Navajo. Scouts moved in tight formation through the narrow passage. Colonel Hargrove had rejected all proposals for peaceful negotiation, dismissing Margaret's warnings with contemptuous certainty in his superior firepower. "They're primitives with bows against rifles," he had scoffed. "If they're foolish enough to resist, they'll learn civilization's cost." Margaret watched from a rocky outcrop alongside Nakohe and 12 Apache warriors. She had escaped the military camp during the night's confusion, when strategically placed signal fires had drawn half the soldiers on a wild pursuit of phantom Apache. "Hargrove thinks you've been recaptured," Nakohe said quietly. "Believes we took you during the night diversion." "Let him," Margaret replied. "It strengthens our position." Nako's shield rested beside him, newly painted with the lightning symbol, and beneath it, the letters of Margaret's name in careful script. A bridge between worlds, even in battle preparation. "Women and children?" she asked, moving to Winter. "Caves," he assured her. "Istu leads them. Only warriors remain." The Apache defensive strategy reflected their intimate knowledge of the landscape. Not direct confrontation, that would be suicide against rifles, but a carefully orchestrated series of traps, ambushes, and natural barriers. Margaret had contributed settler knowledge to Apache wisdom. Knowing military tactics, she had helped position warriors where soldiers would be most vulnerable. Understanding the expedition's objectives, she had identified which sacred sites must be most fiercely defended. "They'll send scouts ahead at the fork," she predicted, indicating the canyon junction ahead. As if summoned by her words, 2 Navajo scouts and a lieutenant detached from the main column, moving cautiously toward the narrow passage that would eventually lead to the hidden mesa. Nakohe signaled silently to warriors positioned along the ridgeline. No arrows flew, not yet. The Apache strategy required patience, drawing the soldiers deeper into the maze of canyons where their numbers and firearms would be least effective. The first trap triggered when the advanced scouts crossed a seemingly solid patch of ground. The sand collapsed beneath them, plunging the men into a pit lined with cactus spines. Their shouts echoed through the canyon, bringing the main force rushing forward into the prepared killing zone. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense, but a deadly game of shadows and surprise. Boulders rolled down canyon walls, cutting off retreat. Flash flood channels, dammed for days in preparation, were suddenly released, sweeping away supplies and ammunition. Warriors appeared and disappeared like spirits, firing arrows from impossible angles before vanishing into hidden crevices. Margaret moved alongside Nakohe, her settler clothing discarded for Apache dress that blended with the terrain. She carried no weapons, but wielded something perhaps more powerful: knowledge of both sides' thinking. "They'll try to gain the high ground," she warned, as soldiers began scaling a seemingly accessible slope. It's standard military doctrine. Nakohe nodded grimly. The lightning path awaits them. The lightning path was an ancient Apache defensive technique, a narrow trail deliberately weakened over generations, designed to collapse when multiple climbers attempted the ascent. 4 soldiers plummeted to their deaths before the others retreated. By midday, the military expedition was in disarray. Cut off from retreat, low on water, their neat formation dissolved into scattered groups of increasingly desperate men. Colonel Hargrove, however, drove them forward with ruthless determination. "He still believes the village lies just ahead," Margaret observed from their new vantage point. "His greed blinds him to the trap." Nakohe's expression was solemn. "Many have died, Apache and soldier both. More will die unless we end this," she replied, touching the thunderstone at her throat. It had remained unnaturally warm throughout the conflict, vibrating occasionally as if in warning or guidance. The decisive moment came when Colonel Hargrove, Lieutenant Bailey, and 15 remaining soldiers approached the false trail, a convincing path that led not to the hidden mesa, but to a dead-end box canyon. Once inside, they would be completely vulnerable. Margaret felt the thunderstone suddenly pulse against her skin. A distant rumble crossed the cloudless sky. "Storm comes," she whispered, though no clouds were visible. "A true one this time." Nakohe looked at her sharply. "You are certain?" She nodded. "Thunder beings speak clearly now. There is another way to end this, without more bloodshed." Before he could respond, rifle fire erupted below. Captain Ellsworth, separated from the main group during an earlier ambush, had emerged from a side canyon. He spotted Margaret on the ridge and called out, "Mrs. Caldwell, for God's sake, come down, we'll protect you." Every warrior's bow turned toward the exposed. "Officer," Nakohe's hand closed around his knife. In that frozen moment, Margaret faced the choice that had been building since the dust storm that had changed her life. The captain represented her old world, civilization, her people, the life she had planned. Nakohe embodied her new path. The lightning people, thunder songs, and a deeper connection to the land itself. As all eyes fixed on her, the thunderstone burned against her skin, showing her a third option entirely. "Hold your fire!" Margaret's voice rang out across the canyon, commanding in its certainty. "There's been enough death today." She stood fully exposed on the ridge, one hand raised toward the Apache warriors, the other extended toward Captain Ellsworth. The thunderstone at her throat glowed with an inner light visible even at a distance. "Margaret, what are you doing?" Nakohe whispered urgently. "Following the thunder's path," she replied. Then to both sides, "I stand between worlds. I offer a way that spills no more blood." The captain hesitated, rifle half raised. "Come down, Mrs. Caldwell. These savages have obviously—" "They are not savages," she interrupted. "They are the lightning people, protectors of this land for generations. And I am Sebigai, White Lightning, accepted among them." She began descending the path, moving with deliberate confidence. After a moment's hesitation, Nakohe followed, his shield with Margaret's name displayed prominently. "Colonel Hargrove marches into a trap," she told Captain Ellsworth as she reached him. 15 men will die in that box canyon unless you signal them to retreat." "How do you know?" "Because I helped design the defense," she said simply. "Just as I now offer to design the peace." Skepticism warred with pragmatism on the captain's face. His expedition was clearly in disarray, men lost, supplies dwindling. Meanwhile, the Apache had demonstrated complete mastery of the terrain. What peace could possibly satisfy both sides? He asked finally. Margaret turned to Nakohe, who had approached within speaking distance, but remained poised for action. She spoke in Apache, explaining her plan, watching his expression shift from wariness to thoughtful consideration. "The silver deposits," she said, returning to English for the captain. "They exist, but not where Colonel Hargrove believes. The richest veins lie away from the sacred sites." "And how would you know this?" Ellsworth demanded. Because the lightning people have known of the shining rocks for generations, she explained. They avoid them, the places where lightning strikes repeatedly, drawing metal to the surface. These areas are considered dangerous, imbalanced. Nakohe spoke in careful English. Apache have maps, not paper maps, memory maps. We know where white man can dig safely, away from sacred ground. The captain's eyes narrowed. And why would you share this knowledge? Because alternative is war, Nakohe replied bluntly. War Apache might win in canyons, but would eventually lose as more soldiers come. We are not blind to changing world. Thunder rumbled again. Closer now, a physical storm approaching to match the metaphorical one. Margaret felt the stone pulse against her skin in perfect synchronization. Captain, she said urgently, call back the colonel, then we talk terms while there's still time. The negotiations took place at the canyon junction as dark clouds gathered overhead. Colonel Hargrove fumed and threatened, but his position was untenable, and Captain Ellsworth, having witnessed the Apache capabilities firsthand, assumed command. Margaret and Nakohe outlined the proposed compromise. The lightning people would identify viable silver mining locations away from sacred sites. They would allow regulated passage along specified routes. In exchange, the military would recognize Apache sovereignty over clearly defined territories, including the hidden mesa and surrounding sacred areas. Impossible, Hargrove blustered. Washington will never recognize Indian title to valuable mineral lands. Washington is far away, Captain Ellsworth observed dryly, and we are here, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. By sunset, as lightning danced, across the canyon heights, a document had been drafted, a treaty unlike any other. On standard military paper, Margaret had transcribed the terms in formal English. Alongside these words, Nakohe had added Apache symbols marking sacred boundaries, spiritual obligations, and ancient claims. No official treaty, Chief Kitchi acknowledged when he arrived with a delegation of elders, but beginning of understanding. He studied the document carefully, then made his mark beside the captain's signature, a lightning symbol crossed with an eagle feather. For this to work, Margaret explained to both sides, there must be those who walk between worlds, who speak both languages, understand both ways. Captain Ellsworth nodded slowly. Interpreters, liaisons. More than that, Margaret corrected. Bridge builders. Chief Kitchi placed his weathered hand on his son's shoulder. Nakohe will speak for lightning people to white government, has feet in both worlds already, and I will speak for settlers. To the Apache, Margaret added, as one who has learned the thunder songs. As the storm broke overhead, cleansing the blood-stained canyon, the two groups separated, not as enemies, but as cautious participants in an unprecedented experiment. That night, beneath the lightning-laced sky, the lightning people gathered. For Margaret's formal adoption ceremony, Istu painted sacred symbols across her forehead, while Chief Kitchi recited the ancient words that would bind her forever to the tribe. You are Tsebigai, he pronounced. White lightning, daughter of thunder, beings bridge between worlds. Nakohe stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the stormlight. And my heart, he added softly. 1 year later, the mesa bloomed with unexpected harmony. The boundary stones stood as silent guardians where Apache territory met the newly established mining settlement of Silver Creek. Each stone bore 2 markings, an official survey designation and a sacred symbol understood only by the lightning people. Margaret stood at the central meeting ground, a neutral space where both worlds converged. Each month for trade and council, a leather-bound journal rested complete in her hands, its pages filled with carefully documented wisdom, thunder songs, healing practices, and storm magic preserved in writing for the first time in Apache history. The last page? Nakohe asked. Approaching from the Apache delegation. The most important, she replied, showing him the carefully illustrated thunder song patterns. For our daughter to learn when she's old enough. Their child slept peacefully in a cradleboard on Margaret's back, her copper-tinted hair and olive skin physical embodiment of the bridge between worlds. They had named her Kicha Ana, daughter of two paths in Apache, though the settlers who came to trade called her Ana. The meeting ground buzzed with activity. Apache healers exchanged knowledge with a frontier doctor who had arrived with the miners, each cautiously sharing remedies that complemented rather than rejected the other's approach. Children from both communities played together at the perimeter, already fluent in each other's languages in the way only the young can master. Not everyone approved of this blending. Takala had departed with a small faction of traditionalists, seeking more isolated territory to preserve the old ways without compromise, and several military officers still grumbled about excessive accommodation of hostiles. But the silver flowed steadily from the mines. The Apache hunting grounds remained protected, and the predicted bloodshed had been largely avoided. "Captain Ellsworth approaches," Nakohe noted, his posture straightening slightly. Though now respected as the official Apache representative to territorial authorities, he never fully relaxed around uniformed men. The captain, recently promoted to major, dismounted nearby. "Mrs. Lightning," he greeted Margaret with the compromise name he'd adopted for official correspondence. "Chief's son," he added with a respectful nod to Nakohe. "The eastern boundary issue?" Margaret inquired directly. "Resolved in your favor," Ellsworth confirmed. "Washington finally ratified the revised agreement. The Sacred Canyon will remain Apache territory in perpetuity." It had taken months of careful diplomacy, multiple testimonies to territorial officials, and Margaret's impassioned letters to influential eastern newspapers to secure this protection. The thunderstone around her neck, never removed since her lightning strike, had guided her through the political labyrinth as surely as it had once guided her through physical danger. As sunset approached, the traders and officials departed, leaving only the permanent residents of this curious borderland. Margaret and Nakohe walked the path toward the Mesa village, now partially visible from below, no longer needing absolute secrecy, but still maintaining its sacred privacy. "My father asks if you will lead thunder ceremony tomorrow," Nakohe said. Chief Kitchi, now grey-haired but still commanding, had gradually ceded ceremonial duties to his son and daughter-in-law as the new era demanded new approaches. "I've prepared the thunder songs," Margaret replied, "and selected those settlers who may observe." This was perhaps their most controversial innovation, allowing certain respectful settlers to witness modified versions of Apache ceremonies, building understanding that went beyond political arrangements to spiritual appreciation. At the mesa's edge, they paused to watch lightning dance across distant mountains. The monsoon season approached again, bringing renewal to the desert landscape. Their daughter stirred, small fingers reaching instinctively toward the illuminated horizon. "She feels it already," Margaret observed. "The thunder's voice." "Daughter of lightning," Nakohe agreed with quiet pride. In their dwelling that evening, Margaret completed the final page of her thunder song book by candlelight. Unlike her original journal, this volume combined Apache pictographs with English phonetic transcriptions, creating a new written language that preserved the sacred sounds exactly as they should be voiced. "Is it right to capture thunder in marks?" "On paper," she had once asked Istu, the old medicine woman, still vital despite her advancing years, had responded with unexpected wisdom. "Thunder lives in sky, in stone, in heart. Marks on paper only remind us where to listen." As if summoned by the memory, Istu appeared at their doorway. "Students, wait," she announced. Outside, in the soft evening light, a small circle had gathered. Apache youth and several settler children whose parents had accepted the Lightning People's invitation to learn the old ways. Margaret took her place. In the circle, the completed Thunder Song book in her hands. "The storm speaks many languages," she began, using the traditional opening. "Tonight, we learn to listen with new ears." As she guided them through the first simple thunder song, There, young voices blending Apache words with English inflections. Nakohe looked on with quiet satisfaction. Their daughter watched with wide, attentive eyes from her cradleboard. Lightning people, he whispered, encompassing all of them. Apache and settler, young and old, those born to the mesa and those who had found their way there. All lightning. A people now. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening purple sky, while distant lightning illuminated the horizon, ancient and eternal, yet forever changing, like the people who had learned to hear its voice.